Hey friends, I'm so glad you're here. Grab a cozy seat and settle in. We've got a wonderful journey ahead. And if you enjoy spending this time together, I'd love for you to subscribe. Tap that little thumbs up and share your thoughts down below. It really means a lot. The Roman Empire. Rise and fall, the truth behind the Western collapse. Chapter 1. The beginnings of Roma's origins are shrouded in myth. But like many great cities of antiquity, it began as a small settlement along the banks of the Tiber River. According to Roman legend, the city was founded in 753 before Common Era by Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a she-wolf after being abandoned by their father. While this tale adds a legendary touch to Rome's beginnings, historians focus on the broader process of gradual settlement and consolidation of power. The early Romans were influenced by the neighboring civilizations, particularly the Etruscans, Greeks, and Latins. The Latins, a tribe settled in the region of Latium, modern-day Lazio, are often credited with the initial establishment of Rome. By the 8th century before Common Era, the Latins had formed a loose collection of villages and settlements. These early communities had to work together to survive against threats from more powerful neighbors, which gradually shaped their political structures. At this stage, Rome was ruled by kings, though much of the early political organization was likely based on tribal councils and chieftains. The position of king was both political and religious, combining the roles of a secular ruler with that of a priest. This early monarchical system was pivotal in shaping the structure of Roman governance, even after the monarchy itself would eventually be overthrown. As Rome grew from a small village into a powerful city-state, it developed a centralized authority under its kings. The first 7 kings of Rome, including the legendary Romulus, were responsible for laying the foundations of the city's infrastructure, religion, and military organization. Romulus, for example, is credited with establishing the Roman Senate and creating the city's first legions, marking the early stages of Rome's military expansion. These early kings ruled with the consent of the aristocracy, which helped to establish a somewhat elitist framework for governance. Rome's political organization was still in its infancy, but its foundations as a militarized society, and one that relied heavily on the participation of its elite families, began to take shape. Chapter 2. The Roman Kingdom. The Roman Kingdom lasted from the traditional founding of Rome in 753 before Common Era until 509 before Common Era, when the monarchy was abolished and the Roman Republic was born. During this period, Rome was ruled by kings, who were elected by a group of aristocrats and were seen as both political and religious leaders. The king's powers were vast, but they were not absolute. The king was expected to lead the military, oversee religious rituals, and govern the city's political affairs. The early Roman kings were not only political figures, but also priests who performed important religious ceremonies, such as sacrifices and prayers to the gods, to ensure the prosperity of the city. Rome's political and social organization during the kingdom was strongly influenced by its neighbors, particularly the Etruscans, who had a significant impact on Roman architecture, religion, and governance. The Romans borrowed many ideas from the Etruscans, including the notion of a centralized monarchy and the importance of omens and divine will in the political process. Many of the first kings of Rome were likely of Etruscan origin, and their reigns marked an important period of consolidation and organization in early Roman history. One of the most significant early kings was Tullius Hostilius, who is credited with expanding Rome's military strength and creating a more organized army. Hostilius' reign was marked by a series of wars with neighboring tribes, including the Albans. Through these conflicts, Rome began to assert its dominance over the surrounding area, laying the groundwork for future military campaigns. Another key figure during the Roman kingdom was Servius Tullius, the 6th king of Rome. Servius introduced significant social and political reforms, including the division of Roman society into classes based on wealth and military service. This division laid the foundation for the later Roman census, which would be used to assess the wealth of citizens and assign them to different military and political roles. Under Servius' rule, Rome became more organized, and the foundation for a broader, more complex political system was set. However, the monarchy was not to last. Toward the end of the Roman kingdom, a series of crises and power struggles within the royal family led to the downfall of the monarchy. The final king of Rome, Tarquinius Superbus, was a tyrant who abused his power and alienated the Roman aristocracy. His reign ended in 509 before Common Era when he was overthrown after a series of events, including the infamous rape of Lucretia, a noble woman who was dishonored by the king's son, Sextus Tarquinius. Lucretia's death spurred a revolution, and the Romans expelled the Tarquin kings, marking the end of the monarchy and the beginning of the Roman Republic. Chapter 3. The fall of the monarchy. The fall of the Roman monarchy was a pivotal moment in Roman history, marking the end of one political era and the beginning of another. The monarchy had lasted nearly 2.5 centuries, with 7 legendary kings, and during that time, Rome grew from a small settlement to a significant city-state. However, by the late 6th century before Common Era, dissatisfaction with the monarchy had reached a breaking point. The last king of Rome, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, is often remembered as a tyrant who abused his power. His reign was characterized by autocratic rule, heavy taxation, and oppression of the Roman nobility. Many historians believe that his cruelty and disregard for traditional Roman values, including the importance of aristocratic participation in governance, led to growing unrest among the ruling class. The final catalyst for the fall of the monarchy came with the tragic story of Lucretia, a noble woman of great virtue who was raped by Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son. Lucretia's story became a rallying point for those who had grown disillusioned with Tarquin's rule. After being violated, Lucretia took her own life, leaving behind a powerful legacy of honor and outrage. Her death sparked an insurrection among the Roman aristocracy, led by Lucius Junius Brutus and other prominent figures, who saw an opportunity to rid Rome of its oppressive monarchy. Brutus and his allies rallied the people, calling for the expulsion of the Tarquin family and the establishment of a new form of government. The uprising was swift and effective. The monarchy was overthrown, and Tarquinius Superbus was expelled from Rome. The expulsion of the last king marked the symbolic end of the Roman kingdom and the dawn of the Roman Republic. In the wake of the monarchy's fall, the Romans sought to establish a new system of governance that would prevent any individual from accumulating too much power. This was a crucial shift, as the aristocracy and the people of Rome feared the return of a tyrannical ruler. The solution they chose was a system of elected officials and shared power, which would eventually become the hallmark of the Roman Republic. In 509 before Common Era, the Roman Republic was born. The monarchy was replaced by a system of consuls, elected annually to serve as the highest officials in Rome. The consuls had executive authority, but their powers were limited by the existence of other political bodies, including the Senate and the popular assemblies. This system was designed to balance power among different groups and prevent any one individual from becoming too powerful. The founding of the Republic was a defining moment in Roman history, one that would shape its political system for centuries to come. Chapter 4. The Roman Republic. Basic structures. The establishment of the Roman Republic in 509 before Common Era marked a radical departure from the monarchy. Instead of a single ruler holding absolute power, Rome's new political system was designed to balance power among elected officials, ensuring that no one person could dominate the state. The Republic was a complex system of checks and balances that evolved over time, with multiple layers of government, each designed to maintain stability and prevent tyranny. At the heart of the Republic were 2 consuls, the highest elected officials. Each year, 2 consuls were chosen by the Roman citizens to serve a 1-year term. These consuls held executive power, leading the Roman government and military. Their primary duties included commanding the army, overseeing foreign policy, and managing the day-to-day affairs of the state. The consuls' power was considerable, but they were kept in check by a few key factors. One of the main checks on the consuls was the principle of collegiality, the fact that there were always 2 consuls who could veto each other's decisions. This prevented any one consul from becoming too powerful. The consuls also served as the leaders of the Senate and had the responsibility of proposing legislation and overseeing its implementation. While their authority was significant, they were still expected to act in the best interests of the Roman state, and they were accountable to the Senate and the popular assemblies. The Senate itself was another vital component of the Roman political system. It was made up of around 300 Roman patricians or aristocrats, and its primary function was to advise the consuls on matters of foreign policy, legislation, and military strategy. While the Senate did not have formal legislative powers, its influence was immense. Senators were typically former magistrates who had a deep understanding of Roman law and governance. Their advice was highly respected, and in many cases they had significant sway over political decisions. Another important institution was the popular assemblies, which gave Roman citizens the power to elect officials, pass laws, and vote on important issues. There were different types of assemblies, such as the Comitia Centuriata, which was responsible for electing consuls and other magistrates, and the Comitia Tributa, which handled laws and elections at the tribal level. These assemblies allowed the Roman people, particularly the plebeians, common citizens, to participate in the political process. However, Rome's political system was not as democratic as it might seem at first glance. The early republic was dominated by the patricians, the wealthy and noble class, who held most of the power in the Senate and other political offices. The plebeians, while able to vote and participate in assemblies, were often excluded from higher offices and lacked the same political influence. Over time, this imbalance would lead to tensions and conflicts between the two classes. In response to these inequalities, the plebeians began to push for reforms that would grant them more political power. This struggle, known as the conflict of the orders, would shape the development of the Republic for centuries. The plebeians' demands for greater representation and protection under the law eventually led to the creation of new offices and laws designed to protect their rights, including the position of tribune of the plebs, whose job was to represent the plebeian interests of the plebeians in the Senate. The political structures of the Roman Republic were thus built around a delicate balance between different institutions, each designed to ensure that power was distributed across multiple bodies. While the system was far from perfect and often faced internal struggles, it laid the foundation for one of the most enduring political systems in history. Chapter 5. The power of the Senate. The Senate played a crucial and dominant role in the Roman Republic. While the consuls were the highest elected officials, the Senate was the political body that held immense sway over Rome's governance. The Roman Senate, initially composed of 300 members, was made up of aristocratic patricians who were appointed for life. Although the Senate technically did not have formal legislative power, its influence over Roman politics, military affairs, and foreign policy was vast. One of the key reasons for the Senate's power was its ability to provide counsel to the consuls and other magistrates. In the early Republic, it was not uncommon for consuls to rely heavily on the advice of the Senate. Senators were often former magistrates, having held positions of power earlier in their careers, and were therefore highly experienced in Roman law, military strategy, and political governance. As a result, the Senate's recommendations held significant weight, even though they did not have the formal power to enact laws. The Senate was the body that managed Rome's relationships with foreign powers, directed military campaigns, and approved treaties. It also had control over financial matters, including how public funds were spent, which was vital for sustaining Rome's military operations. Roman senators would debate matters of great importance, such as the declaration of war or the distribution of land to veterans. Their decisions, though technically advisory, could often shape the course of Rome's foreign and domestic policy. Over time, the Senate's influence extended even further. While magistrates like the consuls had executive authority, the Senate often took the lead in setting political priorities. During times of war or crisis, it was not uncommon for the Senate to appoint a dictator, a magistrate with absolute power, but whose term was limited to 6 months. The Senate would choose the dictator in times of dire need, and while the dictator's power was nearly unchecked, the Senate remained a key institution in overseeing Roman governance. Another aspect of the Senate's power was its role in the appointment of provincial governors. As Rome expanded its territories, the Senate played a central role in selecting governors for provinces, who would manage Roman affairs in distant territories. These governors, known as proconsuls or propraetors, held military and administrative authority in the provinces, but they were always subject to the Senate's oversight. The Senate ensured that governors adhered to Roman policies and upheld Roman interests in these new regions. Despite the Senate's great influence, it was not immune to challenges. While the Senate was composed primarily of the patrician class, the rise of powerful plebeian figures over time began to shift the balance of power. Plebeians were traditionally excluded from holding high office, but their increasing political activism, including the election of tribunes to represent their interests, led to tensions with the Senate. In certain periods, Ambitious generals and political figures, such as Gaius Marius, Sulla, and Julius Caesar, would bypass or challenge the Senate in pursuit of their personal power. The Senate's power was also limited by its need to maintain the appearance of shared authority. In the Roman Republic, political power was fragmented, with different branches of government. The consuls, tribunes, and senate, each holding authority over distinct areas. This system of checks and balances prevented any one institution from gaining too much control. However, as Roman politics became more turbulent, particularly during the late Republic, the Senate's ability to effectively govern diminished, and the power of individual leaders began to rise. In summary, while the Senate in the Roman Republic did not have formal legislative power, its role in advising consuls, overseeing military campaigns, managing finances, and influencing foreign policy gave it tremendous influence. Over time, however, the Senate's authority would be increasingly challenged, and the political system of the Republic would face a series of crises that would eventually lead to its transformation. Chapter 6. Popular Assemblies in the Plebeianson, the Roman Republic. The political system was designed to ensure that power was shared among various social classes. While the aristocratic Senate and the consuls were the main political institutions, the Roman people, particularly the plebeians, also had a voice in government. The plebeians, who were the common citizens of Rome, formed the majority of the population, but were often excluded from the highest levels of political power. However, the popular assemblies gave them a significant, if indirect, influence on Rome's politics. The plebeians were initially excluded from holding high office, as the highest positions, including the consuls and most magistrates, were reserved for the patricians, the aristocratic class. This created a significant social and political divide in Roman society. Over time, the plebeians began to demand more political power, and their struggle for greater rights and representation became known as the conflict of the orders. The plebeians sought more access to political offices and a larger role in decision-making, and this led to the creation of several important political institutions that would change the course of Roman history. One of the key institutions that emerged was the tribunes of the plebs, or tribuni plebis. These magistrates were elected by the plebeians and were specifically tasked with representing their interests in the Senate and the broader political system. The tribunes had the power to veto actions taken by other magistrates or the Senate that they believed were harmful to the plebeians. This power of veto, known as intercessio, was one of the most important tools the tribunes had to protect the rights of the common people. The tribunes' role in Roman politics grew in importance over time, especially after the Lex Hortensia of the 87 before Common Era, which made laws passed by the plebeian assembly binding on all Roman citizens, including the patricians. Before this law, the decisions made by the plebeian assembly, which represented only the common people, were not recognized by the patricians. The Lex Hortensia was a significant victory for the plebeians, as it granted them legal equality with the patricians in terms of legislative power. Alongside the tribunes, the plebeians also had the ability to influence legislation and decision-making through the popular assemblies. There were several different types of assemblies, each serving a different function in the Roman political system. The most important of these was the Comitia Centuriata, which was responsible for electing the highest magistrates, such as the consuls, as well as passing laws and deciding on issues of war and peace. The Comitia Tributa, another assembly, was more focused on electing lower magistrates, such as the quaestors and aediles, and handling other issues that affected the plebeians directly. In the Comitia Centuriata, the Roman citizens were organized into centuries based on wealth and social status. The wealthier centuries had more votes, meaning that the patricians and the upper classes held more influence in this assembly. Despite this, the plebeians still had a role in these assemblies, and their votes could be decisive in certain matters. The Comitia Tributa was a more egalitarian body, where citizens were divided into tribes, and each tribe had an equal vote, regardless of wealth. This gave the plebeians more influence, as it meant that the poorer classes had a stronger voice in this assembly than they did in the Comitia Centuriata. The Comitia Tributa was especially important in electing lower-level magistrates and passing laws that affected the daily lives of the plebeians. As the plebeians gained more political power, their influence in Roman politics grew. The conflict between the patricians and plebeians, while at times contentious, led to significant changes in Roman law and governance. By the end of the Republic, the plebeians had gained much greater political rights, including the ability to hold higher offices, and their participation in the political process helped to shape the future of Rome. Despite these gains, the plebeians were not always in a position to challenge the wealth and influence of the patricians. However, their struggle for greater rights and representation was a key part of the Roman Republic's political development, and it laid the groundwork for the political transformations that would follow in the empire. Chapter 7. The expansion of the Republicas. The Roman Republic grew, so did its territorial ambitions. The Republic's political structure, though designed to prevent any one individual from becoming too powerful, was adaptable enough to allow Rome to expand and evolve as a dominant military and political force in the ancient world. Through a combination of warfare, diplomacy, and strategic alliances, Rome steadily expanded its control over the Italian peninsula and beyond, eventually becoming one of the greatest empires in history. The Roman expansion was not instantaneous. It was a gradual process that took centuries to unfold. Early on, Rome focused on consolidating its control over the surrounding areas of Latium and the other Latin cities. The establishment of alliances with other Latin cities was essential in the early stages of Rome's territorial growth. These alliances often came with the promise of mutual protection and benefits in times of war. The Romans were skilled diplomats, and their ability to forge these alliances helped them gain crucial military and political advantages. The first significant phase of Roman expansion occurred during the Samnite Wars. 343–290 before Common Era. The Samnites, an Italic tribe living in central and southern Italy, were formidable opponents who had long resisted Roman influence. However, over the course of 3 wars, Rome was able to defeat the Samnites and absorb much of their territory into the Roman sphere of influence. This victory was important not only because it expanded Rome's borders, but also because it demonstrated the Republic's growing military might and organizational ability. During this time, the Roman military evolved significantly. The early Roman legions were based on a citizen-soldier model, where each citizen was required to serve in the military. This system worked well in the early days of the Republic, when Rome was primarily concerned with defending itself against immediate threats. However, as Rome's territorial ambitions grew, it became necessary to professionalize the army and create a more permanent and specialized force. The reforms of Gaius Marius in the late 2nd century before Common Era were instrumental in transforming the Roman military into a powerful force capable of sustaining long-term campaigns far from home. Rome's expansion continued through the Pyrrhic War, 280–275 before Common Era, in which Rome defeated King Pyrrhus of Epirus, an ally of the Greek cities in southern Italy. The war was costly for both sides, but Rome's victory further cemented its dominance in Italy. This also marked the beginning of Rome's involvement in the wider Mediterranean world. By the mid-3rd century before Common Era, Rome had secured control over nearly all of Italy, but the next major challenge came from outside the Italian peninsula. The Punic Wars, 264–146 before Common Era, were a series of 3 wars fought between Rome and Carthage, a powerful city-state located in North Africa. The Punic Wars were a defining period in Roman history, marking Rome's transition from a regional power to a global empire. The First Punic War, 264–241 before Common Era, was fought over control of Sicily, and despite significant early setbacks, Rome emerged victorious, gaining control of the island. The Second Punic War, 218–201 before Common Era, famously marked by the Carthaginian general Hannibal's audacious march across the Alps, posed a serious threat to Rome's survival. However, the Roman general Scipio Africanus ultimately defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 before Common Era, securing Rome's position as the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, 149–146 before Common Era, was Rome's final confrontation with Carthage. After a brutal siege, Rome completely destroyed Carthage. Its territory was annexed, and its people either killed or enslaved. This victory marked the end of Carthage as a major rival and solidified Rome's control over the western Mediterranean. Following the Punic Wars, Rome turned its attention eastward, conquering the Hellenistic kingdoms of the eastern Mediterranean, including Greece, Macedonia, and parts of Asia Minor. Rome's expansion brought vast wealth and resources, but it also created new challenges. As Rome's territories grew, so did the complexity of its political and military organization. The need for effective governance and military command became more pressing, leading to the rise of powerful generals who could command armies across vast distances. This development would eventually have a profound impact on the political structure of the Republic, leading to the concentration of power in the hands of individual leaders. The expansion of the Republic also created tensions between the ruling elite and the common people. While the aristocracy benefited from the new wealth and territories, many plebeians found themselves serving in long, costly military campaigns that took them far from home. The growing gap between the rich and poor in Rome led to increased social unrest and dissatisfaction with the Republic's political system. As Rome expanded its territory, it faced new problems in maintaining control over its growing empire. The political system of the Republic, which had worked well in the earlier, smaller days of Rome, was ill-suited for managing a vast and diverse empire. The Senate and the popular assemblies struggled to adapt to these new challenges, and tensions between the different social classes and political factions began to escalate. Chapter 8. The social wars. The expansion of the Roman Republic brought both prosperity and conflict, not only with external enemies, but also within the state itself. One of the most significant internal challenges came from the social wars, 91-88 before Common Era, a series of brutal conflicts between Rome and its Italian allies. These wars were primarily driven by the demands of Rome's Italian allies, known as the Socii, for full Roman citizenship, and the rights that came with it. As Rome expanded its territory, it formed alliances with many of the Italian tribes and city-states. These allies contributed soldiers to Rome's military campaigns and shared in the spoils of war. However, despite their contributions, the Socii were excluded from full citizenship, which meant they had no say in the political process, no access to the highest offices, and no participation in the important decisions made by the Roman Senate or the popular assemblies. They were also subject to Roman taxation and military service without having the same rights as Roman citizens. The tension between Rome and its allies grew over the years, with many Italian communities feeling increasingly disenfranchised and resentful. The final spark for the social wars came when the Roman Senate rejected a proposal to grant citizenship to all Italians, fearing that such a move would dilute their own political power. In response, several Italian allies revolted, forming a coalition of tribes and cities that sought to achieve Roman citizenship by force. The social wars were marked by fierce and bloody battles, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The allies were able to field large armies and effectively challenge Roman forces in the field. However, despite their initial successes, the Allied coalition struggled to maintain unity, as the different tribes had different interests and goals. The Roman Republic, with its highly organized military and political system, was ultimately able to overcome the rebellion. In the end, the Roman Senate granted citizenship to most of the Italian allies in 89 before Common Era. But by then, the war had caused significant damage. The conflict had exposed weaknesses in Rome's political system, particularly its inability to fully integrate and accommodate its allies. The social wars also had long-term effects on Roman society, as the influx of new citizens from the Italian peninsula led to greater political and social complexity. The outcome of the social wars had a profound impact on the Roman Republic. The Roman citizenship granted to the Italian allies greatly expanded the electorate, which in turn increased the political influence of the Italian provinces. This shift also made it easier for ambitious politicians and military leaders to rally support from the newly enfranchised citizens, further destabilizing the traditional political structures of the Republic. The social wars also contributed to the growing power of the military in Roman politics. Roman generals who had commanded armies during the conflict began to play a more prominent role in the political landscape, as they could now use their veteran soldiers to gain influence and support in Rome. This militarization of politics would continue to shape the Republic's political dynamics, leading to the rise of powerful generals such as Gaius Marius, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and eventually Julius Caesar, who would each challenge the traditional political system of the Republic in their own way. Chapter 9. The rise of Gaius Marius. The social and political upheaval of the social wars set the stage for one of the most transformative figures in Roman history. Gaius Marius, a talented general and ambitious politician, Marius rose from humble origins to become one of the most powerful men in Rome. His career marked the beginning of a profound shift in the Roman political and military systems, laying the groundwork for the eventual collapse of the Roman Republic. Gaius Marius was born around 157, before Common Era, into a plebeian family, which made his rise to power all the more remarkable. Despite his lack of aristocratic pedigree, Marius' military abilities and political savvy allowed him to climb the ranks of Roman society. His early success as a soldier and his connection to powerful political figures helped him gain the support of Rome's elite. In 107 before Common Era, Marius was elected consul for the first time, a remarkable achievement for someone of his background. One of Marius's most significant reforms was his transformation of the Roman military. Before Marius, the Roman army had been composed primarily of property-owning citizens who could afford to equip themselves for battle. This system, known as the census-based army, meant that only the wealthiest Romans could serve as soldiers, leaving the poor and landless excluded from military service. Marius changed this by opening the army to all Roman citizens, regardless of wealth or social status. This reform allowed the poorest men, known as the caput censi, to join the army, effectively creating a professional standing army. Soldiers were now provided with equipment by the state, and they were promised land and rewards after their service. This move not only increased the size and efficiency of the Roman army, but also created a new class of soldiers who were deeply loyal to their generals, as they depended on them for their rewards and future livelihoods. This shift in the military had far-reaching consequences. By creating a more professional army, Marius greatly enhanced Rome's military power, allowing it to expand and conquer even more territory. However, the loyalty of soldiers now rested more with their individual commanders than with the state or the Senate. Marius' reform set a dangerous precedent for future generals, as it made the army a political tool that could be used to pursue personal power. Marius' military success and his growing influence in Roman politics were not without controversy. His reforms alienated many of the traditional elites, who saw the new army as a threat to their power and influence. At the same time, Marius' success created a rivalry with other prominent Roman generals, most notably Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who would later become one of Marius' greatest enemies. Marius' influence continued to grow throughout the late 2nd and early 1st centuries before Common Era. He held the consulship an unprecedented 7 times, making him one of the most powerful men in Rome. His military victories, including his success in the Jugurthine War from 111-105 before Common Era, and his role in the Marian reforms, cemented his reputation as a formidable general and a key figure in the Republic's expansion. However, Marius' political career was also marked by deep divisions. His rivalry with Sulla, who was initially one of his subordinates, would eventually lead to a civil war. In 88 before Common Era, as Marius' power reached its peak, the Senate granted command of a military campaign in the east to Sulla. Marius, eager to maintain his influence, opposed this decision and seized the opportunity to challenge Sulla directly. Marius' supporters in the city of Rome, known as the Populares, clashed with the Optimates, the conservative faction led by Sulla and his allies. This conflict between Marius and Sulla would culminate in a violent struggle for control of Rome. Marius briefly regained power in 87 before Common Era, but his rule was short-lived. He died in 86 before Common Era, leaving behind a deeply divided republic. Sulla, having returned from his campaign in the east, would eventually march on Rome, leading to a brutal civil war that would further destabilize the republic. Marius' rise and his military reforms had lasting consequences for Rome. While his reforms made the Roman army more effective and powerful, they also contributed to the erosion of the traditional political system. The loyalty of soldiers to their generals, rather than the Senate, would play a key role in the future rise of powerful military leaders like Sulla, Julius Caesar, and Augustus, all of whom would challenge the Republic's authority and contribute to its eventual collapse. Chapter 10. The triumvirates. The later years of the Roman Republic saw the rise of increasingly powerful political figures, many of whom sought to consolidate their power through alliances with other influential leaders. These informal and often unstable coalitions, known as triumvirates, played a crucial role in the Republic's transition from a system of shared power to one dominated by military strongmen. The two main triumvirates, the first and second triumvirates, were instrumental in shaping the course of Roman history. The first triumvirate, formed in 60 before Common Era, was an informal alliance between three of Rome's most powerful figures: Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Crassus. Each of these men had their own reasons for forming this alliance. Caesar was a rising star in Roman politics, seeking military glory and greater political influence. Pompey, a celebrated general who had achieved great victories in the East, sought land for his veterans and recognition for his accomplishments. Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, was interested in securing more political influence and military power, particularly after suffering a significant defeat in the Parthian campaign. The first triumvirate was not an official political institution, but it allowed these three men to dominate Roman politics. They worked together to advance each other's interests, often bypassing the traditional Senate and its conservative leadership. Caesar, for example, was able to secure a military command in Gaul, where he would go on to achieve remarkable successes. Pompey's veterans were granted land in the Italian provinces, and Crassus was able to push through legislation that benefited his business interests. However, despite the initial successes of the triumvirate, the alliance began to fray as each member sought to increase his own power. Crassus was killed in battle during a campaign against the Parthians in 53 before Common Era, leaving Pompey and Caesar to compete for dominance. Tensions between the two men escalated, particularly as Caesar's military success in Gaul made him immensely popular among the Roman people, and his army grew more loyal to him than to the Senate or Pompey. The rivalry between Caesar and Pompey would ultimately lead to civil war. In 49 before Common Era, Caesar, refusing to disband his army, crossed the Rubicon River, effectively declaring war on Rome. The famous phrase, "The die is cast, alea acta est," is often attributed to Caesar at this moment. Pompey, unable to gather sufficient support, fled to Greece, where he was later defeated by Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 before Common Era. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated. With Pompey's death, Caesar emerged as the undisputed master of the Roman world. His control over the military and his popularity among the Roman people allowed him to consolidate power and push through a series of political reforms. However, his rule also caused alarm among those who feared his growing power. In 44 before Common Era, Caesar was assassinated by a group of conspirators, including some of his closest allies, such as Brutus and Cassius. The assassination, intended to restore the Republic, only deepened the political crisis. After Caesar's death, the second triumvirate was formed in 43 before Common Era by three of his loyal supporters: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, Mark Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepida. The second triumvirate was an official and legally sanctioned body, with powers far greater than the earlier informal triumvirate. The three men sought to avenge Caesar's assassination and maintain their hold on power, but like the first triumvirate, the second was fraught with tensions and rivalries. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus initially worked together to defeat the forces of Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 before Common Era, securing their control over Rome. However, the triumvirs soon began to turn on each other. Lepidus was sidelined, and the rivalry between Octavian and Antony grew, particularly over control of the eastern provinces, where Antony had formed a political and romantic alliance with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. This rivalry culminated in the Battle of Actium in 31 before Common Era, a decisive naval battle in which Octavian's forces defeated Antony and Cleopatra. Antony and Cleopatra both committed suicide shortly afterward, and Octavian emerged as the undisputed ruler of Rome. Octavian's victory marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, as he assumed the title of Augustus in 27 before Common Era, becoming the first Roman emperor. The triumphs and eventual collapse of the two triumvirates highlighted the Republic's inability to manage its growing empire and the increasing concentration of power in the hands of military leaders. While the triumvirates allowed Rome to continue expanding and consolidating its power, they also exposed the weaknesses of the Republic's political system, setting the stage for the rise of autocracy. Chapter 11. Julius Caesar. The rise of a dictator. Julius Caesar's rise to power marks one of the most significant turning points in Roman history. Although he did not establish the Roman Empire directly, his actions and reforms paved the way for its creation. His rise, rooted in his exceptional military skills, political acumen, and ambition, reflected the turmoil and instability of the late Republic. Caesar's actions as both a general and a politician were transformative, and his death in 44 before Common Era would lead to the eventual collapse of the Republic and the rise of imperial rule under Augustus. Caesar was born in 100 before Common Era into a patrician family, but one that lacked the wealth and influence of Rome's most powerful families. His early career was shaped by both his political connections and his military ability. He started his career in public service by holding various political offices and gaining the favor of powerful figures such as Pompey the Great and Crassus. This helped him to form the first triumvirate, an alliance that allowed Caesar to further his career and ambitions. Caesar's most notable military achievement was his conquest of Gaul, which lasted from 58 before Common Era to 50 before Common Era. The Gallic Wars were a series of campaigns in which Caesar expanded Rome's territory dramatically, ultimately bringing the whole of Gaul under Roman control. This campaign not only increased Caesar's wealth and military power, but also made him incredibly popular among the Roman people and his soldiers, who saw him as a hero. His success in Gaul made him one of the most influential and feared generals in the Roman world. However, Caesar's growing popularity and military success also alarmed his political rivals, especially Pompey, who had once been his ally in the first triumvirate. Tensions between Caesar and Pompey increased after the death of Crassus in 53 before Common Era, leaving the two men to compete for dominance. The Senate, increasingly wary of Caesar's power, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome in 50 before Common Era, a demand that Caesar refused to comply with. Instead, in 49 before Common Era, he crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act of insurrection that signaled the start of a civil war between Caesar and Pompey's forces. The phrase, "the die is cast," is famously attributed to Caesar at this moment, highlighting his commitment to war. The phrase marks a point of no return, as crossing the Rubicon meant that Caesar had defied the Senate and taken the first step towards seizing control of the Republic. Caesar's forces defeated Pompey's army, and Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was eventually murdered. Caesar's victory in the Civil War made him the unrivaled leader of Rome. Following his victory, Caesar was appointed dictator, a position that granted him almost absolute power. He made a series of reforms aimed at addressing some of the most pressing issues of Roman society. His reforms included the reorganization of the Senate, the expansion of citizenship, land redistribution to veterans, and the reform of the calendar, which led to the creation of the Julian calendar. Caesar's reforms were widely popular, particularly among the lower classes, who saw improvements in their living conditions. However, his increasing concentration of power alarmed many of Rome's elite, who feared that Caesar would eventually become a king. The Roman Republic had long been wary of monarchical rule, and the idea of one man holding such power was seen as a threat to the traditional system of shared governance. In 44 before Common Era, Caesar was declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life, a move that cemented his authority but also escalated fears among his opponents. The conspirators who assassinated Caesar on the Ides of March 15th and 44 before Common Era, led by figures such as Brutus and Cassius, believed that they were saving the Republic from tyranny. They hoped that Caesar's death would restore power to the Senate and the Roman people. However, the murder of Caesar did not bring the return of the Republic. Instead, it plunged Rome into further instability and civil war, as factions vied for control of the Roman world. Caesar's death triggered a power struggle between his supporters, led by his adopted heir Octavian, and his opponents, including Mark Antony and Lepidus. This conflict would eventually lead to the formation of the Second Triumvirate and the final collapse of the Republic. As Octavian emerged victorious, the assassination of Caesar did not restore the Republic, but instead set the stage for the rise of imperial rule under Augustus. Julius Caesar's rise to power and his subsequent assassination marked the end of the Roman Republic's political system as it had been known. His reforms and military success expanded Rome's power, but his consolidation of authority made it clear that Rome was on the brink of an entirely new political structure, one that would be dominated by emperors rather than elected officials. Chapter 12. The death of Caesar and the end of the Republic. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March 44 before Common Era was one of the most pivotal moments in Roman history. The conspirators, including Brutus and Cassius, hoped that by killing Caesar, they would restore the Roman Republic to its former state, removing the threat of monarchy and tyranny. They believed that the Republic, with its traditional system of shared power and governance by the Senate, could return to its previous glory. However, their actions set off a chain of events that only deepened the political crisis in Rome, ultimately leading to the end of the Republic. In the immediate aftermath of Caesar's death, there was not the hope for return to republican governance. Instead, the power vacuum left by Caesar's murder sparked fierce competition for control of Rome. The Senate, which had seen its authority undermined by Caesar's autocratic rule, was unable to stabilize the situation. A sense of uncertainty gripped the city as various political factions sought to fill the void left by the fallen dictator. Caesar's death had a profound impact on the political landscape of Rome. His adopted heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus, was just a teenager at the time, but he quickly emerged as one of the central figures in the struggle for power. Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew, had been named as Caesar's heir in his will, giving him a legitimate claim to his estate and position. Octavian's political skill, combined with his strong ties to Caesar's memory, allowed him to garner support among Caesar's veterans and other loyalists. However, Octavian was not alone in his pursuit of power. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and ally, also sought to control Rome in the wake of the dictator's death. Antony had been serving as consul at the time of Caesar's assassination, and he initially sought to capitalize on Caesar's death by portraying himself as the defender of Caesar's legacy. His control of the military, along with his personal influence, made him a formidable rival to Octavian. Lepidus, a third member of the Second Triumvirate, also played a role in the post-Caesar power struggle. Lepidus had been a supporter of Caesar, and he had been appointed as a high-ranking official in Caesar's administration. Together, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 before Common Era, a political alliance that gave them nearly absolute power. Unlike the First Triumvirate, which had been an informal alliance, the Second Triumvirate was legally sanctioned and granted the trio unprecedented authority to reform the government and eliminate their enemies. The formation of the Second Triumvirate marked the beginning of a new phase in Roman politics. The triumvirs used their power to purge their rivals, executing many of Caesar's assassins, including Brutus and Cassius, who had led the plot to kill Caesar. These actions were intended to solidify their control over Rome and eliminate any threats to their rule. However, the alliance between Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus would prove to be short-lived. The power struggle between Octavian and Antony intensified as they competed for control of the Roman world. Antony, having control of the eastern provinces and being deeply involved with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, began to clash with Octavian over the distribution of power. Their rivalry culminated in the Battle of Actium in 31 before Common Era, where Octavian's forces decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet. Following their defeat, Antony and Cleopatra both committed suicide in 30 before Common Era, and Octavian became the undisputed ruler of Rome. This marked the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, as Octavian assumed the title of Augustus, the first Roman emperor, in 27 before Common Era. His rise to power effectively ended the political system that had governed Rome for centuries. The assassination of Julius Caesar and the subsequent events revealed the deep flaws in the Roman Republic's political system. The Republic, which had once been a complex system of shared power and checks and balances, was increasingly dominated by individuals who sought to consolidate power in their own hands. The rise of Caesar, and later Octavian, demonstrated that Rome's political institutions were no longer able to contain the ambitions of powerful men. The Republic had been weakened by internal divisions, military overreach, and the concentration of power in the hands of generals. and it was only a matter of time before Rome would be ruled by emperors. In the aftermath of Caesar's death, the Republic was irrevocably changed. The political system that had governed Rome for centuries gave way to the imperial system, which would last for more than 4 centuries in the West. Caesar's assassination, rather than restoring the Republic, hastened its demise and set Rome on a new course, one that would eventually see the Roman Empire reach its peak under Augustus and his successors. Chapter 13. The emergence of the Principate, the death of Julius Caesar, and the subsequent defeat of his rivals in the civil wars set the stage for the transformation of the Roman state. With the fall of the Roman Republic, Augustus, formerly known as Octavian, emerged as the sole ruler of Rome, bringing an end to centuries of republican governance. In 27 before Common Era, Octavian was given the title Augustus by the Senate, marking the beginning of the Roman Empire and the establishment of a new political system known as the Principate. The Principate was a system of government that maintained the outward appearance of the Republic, while consolidating power in the hands of one man. Augustus was careful to avoid presenting himself as a dictator or king, titles that were associated with the downfall of the Republic. Instead, he presented himself as the Princeps, meaning first citizen, emphasizing his role as a leader who upheld the values and traditions of the Republic. Augustus was careful to retain the formal structures of the Senate, the popular assemblies, and the magistracies, but in practice, he held ultimate control over the political and military affairs of the state. Augustus's rise to power and his creation of the Principate marked a significant shift in Roman politics. While the Senate and other republican institutions retained their formal roles, Augustus held control over the most important aspects of governance. He was the commander-in-chief of the Roman army, which gave him enormous power over the military. He also controlled the provinces, where he appointed governors and maintained Roman authority through military presence. One of Augustus' primary achievements was the stabilization of Rome after decades of civil war. The Republic had been weakened by internal conflict, and Augustus' rule brought a sense of order and peace to the Roman world. This period of relative stability, known as the Pax Romana, Roman peace, lasted for over 2 centuries and allowed the Roman Empire to flourish. Augustus's reforms, including the establishment of a standing army, the expansion of the empire's borders, and the creation of a more efficient and centralized administration, laid the foundation for the success of the Roman Empire. Augustus also implemented a series of reforms that consolidated his power and ensured the loyalty of the Roman people. He reformed the tax system, established a network of roads and communication, and initiated public works projects that improved the infrastructure of Rome. He also reformed the Roman legal system, codifying laws that would influence Western legal thought for centuries. Augustus's patronage of the arts and culture also helped solidify his image as a benefactor of the Roman people, promoting literature, sculpture, and architecture that celebrated Rome's greatness. Despite these achievements, Augustus' reign was not without challenges. The Roman Empire faced external threats, particularly from Germanic tribes in the north and Parthia in the east. Augustus also faced internal challenges from those who were dissatisfied with his concentration of power. While he carefully avoided the title of king, many senators and aristocrats resented his dominance and feared that he would ultimately undermine the traditional republican system. To address these concerns, Augustus carefully balanced the power he held with the appearance of republican institutions. He made sure to preserve the Senate's role in governing, and he regularly sought its approval for his actions. However, by controlling the military and the provinces, Augustus effectively rendered the Senate and other republican institutions powerless. He carefully cultivated the image of a ruler who respected the traditions of the Republic while consolidating all real power in his own hands. The Principate, as established by Augustus, would become the dominant form of government for the Roman Empire. Although there would be moments of instability and conflict, particularly during the crisis of the 3rd century, the basic structure of the Principate persisted for centuries. Augustus's reign set the stage for the succession of emperors who would rule Rome for the next 400 years. In conclusion, the emergence of the Principate marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of a new era in Roman history. Augustus's ability to consolidate power while preserving the outward appearance of the Republic was key to his success. Under his leadership, The Roman Empire entered a period of unprecedented stability and expansion, setting the stage for the Roman Empire's dominance in the Mediterranean world. Augustus' reign, often regarded as one of the most successful in Roman history, laid the foundation for the imperial system that would endure for centuries. Chapter 14. The political structure of the Principate. The establishment of the Principate under Augustus marked a dramatic shift in Roman governance. While Augustus carefully preserved many of the traditional republican institutions, he subtly and effectively centralized power in his own hands. The political structure of the Principate was thus a blend of the old republican framework and the new autocratic rule of the emperor. Augustus, as the first princeps, first citizen, created a system that allowed him to control the Roman state while maintaining the appearance of a republic. One of the key elements of the Principate was the maintenance of the Senate's role in governance. While the Senate still had formal authority, its power was largely symbolic in the face of Augustus' control. Augustus held the title of imperator, or commander-in-chief, which gave him ultimate control over the military. He was also granted tribunatia potestas, or the powers of a tribune, which included the ability to veto legislation, summon and preside over the Senate, and protect the interests of the plebeians. This effectively gave Augustus control over both the military and the legislative process, which was unprecedented in the Roman world. Augustus' ability to hold multiple powers simultaneously was a key feature of the Principate. He held the imperium maius, or supreme military command, which allowed him to command the Roman legions and manage the provinces. He also maintained the title of Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, which gave him significant religious authority. This combination of military, political, and religious power allowed Augustus to centralize control and effectively manage the empire. Another crucial aspect of the Principate was the civitas, or citizenship, which was granted to many people across the Roman Empire. Augustus' reforms extended Roman citizenship to many of the inhabitants of newly conquered territories, thereby integrating these regions into the Roman political system. This process was essential in maintaining stability and ensuring loyalty to Rome. By granting citizenship to provincials, Augustus helped to create a more unified empire, where people from diverse cultures and regions were bound together by shared Roman institutions. The provincial administration under Augustus was also a key element of the Principate's structure. Augustus divided the empire into provinces, which were either governed by a legatus, appointed by the emperor, or by a proconsul, appointed by the Senate. The imperial provinces were directly under Augustus' control, and these provinces were typically military in nature. The senatorial provinces, on the other hand, were governed by former consuls or praetors who were elected by the Senate. This division of power allowed Augustus to maintain control over key military regions while keeping a semblance of republican governance in less strategically important areas. The civil service or bureaucracy under Augustus also expanded significantly. Augustus appointed officials to manage the day-to-day affairs of the empire, from tax collection to maintaining the infrastructure of Roman cities. The civil service allowed Augustus to run a more efficient and organized empire, and it was instrumental in ensuring that the vast Roman Empire was able to function smoothly despite its size and diversity. Despite the apparent concentration of power in Augustus' hands, the political system of the Principate was still presented as a continuation of the Roman Republic. Augustus was careful to avoid titles that would imply absolute rule, such as Rex King, and instead relied on the traditional republican titles, such as princeps and imperator. This was part of Augustus' larger strategy of preserving the appearance of the republic while consolidating power. He sought to portray himself as the protector of Roman values, restoring peace and stability after the chaos of the civil wars. This message resonated with the Roman people, who had grown weary of years of political infighting and violence. Augustus' skillful manipulation of power allowed him to govern without the overt autocracy that had characterized the monarchy. He presented himself as a first among equals, a leader who respected the traditional Roman values while maintaining control over the key aspects of governance. His ability to balance these competing demands laid the foundation for the future emperors of Rome, who would rule with a similar mix of centralization and republican appearances. The Principate system established by Augustus was designed to provide stability and continuity in an empire that had been torn apart by civil war. While the Senate and traditional republican offices remained in place, they were increasingly irrelevant in the face of Augustus' power. Over time, This system evolved into the more overtly autocratic dominant phase of the Roman Empire, particularly under later emperors. But Augustus' creation of the Principate allowed Rome to transition from a republic to an empire in a way that avoided the appearance of dictatorship and preserved a sense of Roman tradition. The Principate was a unique political system that allowed Augustus to wield extraordinary power while maintaining the facade of the Republic. This delicate balance of power and symbolism was key to Augustus' success, as it allowed him to consolidate his authority while avoiding the backlash that had led to the downfall of previous autocratic rulers. His reign brought peace, stability, and prosperity to Rome, laying the foundation for the Roman Empire's dominance over the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. Chapter 15. The role of emperors in the empire. At the establishment of the Principate under Augustus marked the beginning of a new era in Roman governance, where emperors would become the central figures in Roman politics. While Augustus carefully avoided the title of king and presented himself as the first citizen of Rome, future emperors embraced imperial rule more fully, making the emperor the undisputed leader of the empire. The role of the emperor in the Roman Empire would evolve over time, but it remained crucial to maintaining the stability and unity of the empire. In the early years of the empire, the emperor's role was that of a central authority figure who oversaw the military, the provinces, and the political structure of Rome. While the Senate continued to exist, the emperor held the real power. Emperors like Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero wielded supreme control over military matters, foreign policy, and the appointment of key officials, though they still relied on the Senate and other traditional Roman institutions to manage the day-to-day functions of the empire. The emperor's authority was built on the concept of imperium, which granted the ruler supreme command over the military. This was a direct extension of the power that Augustus had accumulated as imperator. The emperor was also often granted the title of Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, which gave him religious authority over Roman worship and rituals. This combination of military and religious power made the emperor the central figure in Roman life. In addition to their military and religious roles, emperors were expected to be patrons of the Roman people. The emperor was the ultimate benefactor, providing grain for the populace, funding public works projects, and organizing festivals and games to keep the people entertained and satisfied. The emperor's image was also central to Roman propaganda, with his likeness appearing on coins, statues, and public monuments throughout the empire. This helped solidify his presence in the minds of the people, ensuring that the emperor's authority was both political and symbolic. The role of the emperor evolved significantly over time. Under Augustus, the emperor maintained a balance of power between himself and the Senate, often consulting with the Senate and making decisions in a way that kept the appearance of republican governance. However, as the empire expanded and the need for central authority grew, later emperors began to assume more direct control over all aspects of governance. For example, during the reign of Tiberius, 1437 CE, the emperor's power became more pronounced. While Tiberius was initially seen as a cautious and reluctant ruler, his reign marked the increasing centralization of power. Tiberius used the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite bodyguard, to control political life in Rome, and his reign saw the beginning of a more autocratic style of rule. The next few emperors, including Caligula, 3741 CE, Claudius, 4154 CE, and Nero, 5468 CE, would show the extremes of imperial power. Caligula's reign was marked by erratic behavior and the assertion of absolute authority. He famously declared himself a living god, demanding worship from the Roman people. Claudius, on the other hand, proved to be an efficient administrator and expanded the empire, though he too relied heavily on imperial power. Nero, infamous for his tyranny, became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked imperial rule, and his reign ended in his suicide after a series of revolts and growing opposition. Despite the excesses and failures of some emperors, the role of the emperor remained integral to the survival of the Roman Empire. The emperor was not only a political leader, but also the embodiment of Roman power and authority. Emperors were expected to bring stability, security, and prosperity to the empire, and their success or failure could determine the fate of Rome. As the Roman Empire expanded, the role of the emperor became even more complex. The emperor was responsible for managing vast territories, often through appointed provincial governors who answered directly to him. These governors administered the provinces, collected taxes, and maintained order. While the emperor had the ultimate authority, his ability to effectively govern the entire empire depended on the loyalty and competence of these provincial leaders. One of the most significant challenges faced by emperors was maintaining control over the military. As Rome expanded, its legions became the most powerful force in the empire. The loyalty of the army was crucial to the emperor's survival. Emperors who could not maintain the support of the legions often faced rebellion and civil war, as military leaders would vie for power and control. This instability was particularly evident during the crisis of the 3rd century, 235–284 CE, when a series of weak and ineffective emperors allowed the empire to fragment and suffer invasions from external enemies. The emperor's role was further complicated by the complex relationship between imperial power and the Senate. While the Senate still formally existed, it was largely under the emperor's control. Emperors would often manipulate the Senate to gain legitimacy for their rule, presenting themselves as defenders of Roman traditions while consolidating their own power. Some emperors, such as Hadrian, 117–138 CE, worked to maintain the appearance of collaboration with the Senate, while others, like Caligula and Nero, openly disregarded its authority. In the later stages of the empire, the emperor's role became even more central as the empire faced external pressures and internal instability. The emperor was not only a military leader but also a religious figure, particularly after Constantine the Great, 306–337 CE, embraced Christianity and made it the state religion. This marked the beginning of the Byzantine period of the Roman Empire, where the emperor would hold not only political power, but also religious authority, thus shaping the empire's legacy for centuries to come. In conclusion, the role of the emperor in the Roman Empire was multifaceted, combining military, political, religious, and symbolic authority. While the emperor's power evolved over time, it remained a central force in Roman governance. Emperors were expected to bring stability and prosperity to the empire, but their ability to maintain control depended on their ability to manage both the military and the diverse population of the empire. As the empire grew and changed, the emperor's role adapted, but the position remained essential to Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean world. Chapter 16. The crisis of the 3rd century Roman Empire reached its peak of territorial expansion and relative stability under the early emperors. But by the late 2nd century CE, the empire began to face a series of internal and external challenges that would threaten its very existence. This period, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, 235–284 CE, was marked by political instability, military anarchy, economic decline, and external invasions. It was a time of severe turbulence for the Roman Empire, during which it nearly collapsed under the weight of these combined pressures. The crisis began after the death of Emperor Severus Alexander in 235 CE, marking the end of the Severan dynasty. With his death, the empire descended into chaos as a series of short-reigning emperors, often chosen by the army, fought for control. This period is often referred to as the Barracks Emperor's era, as the military played a central role in the selection and deposition of emperors. The army became the key to political power, and military leaders could rise to the throne through force, leading to a cycle of constant civil war and instability. One of the most significant challenges faced by the empire during this time was the fragmentation of its borders. The Roman Empire had grown so large that it became increasingly difficult to manage and defend. To the north, the Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Vandals, and Franks, launched a series of raids and invasions, threatening the empire's frontiers. Meanwhile, in the east, the Persians, under the Sassanid Empire, posed a significant threat to Rome's eastern provinces, particularly Mesopotamia. These external threats put immense pressure on the Roman military, forcing the empire to spread its forces thin and defend multiple frontiers at once. Internally, the empire faced economic difficulties. The constant need to fund military campaigns drained the empire's coffers, and the Roman economy began to suffer from inflation, high taxes, and a decline in agricultural productivity. The debasement of the Roman currency, as emperors minted more coins with less silver content, exacerbated the financial crisis. This caused economic instability and contributed to widespread social unrest, as the people of Rome and the provinces faced increased hardship. The plague of Cyprian, around 250–270 CE, further compounded these problems. This devastating epidemic, believed to be either smallpox or measles, ravaged the empire, killing a significant portion of the population. The loss of life disrupted agricultural production, weakened the military, and caused further economic strain. The epidemic also contributed to the destabilization of the Roman social fabric, as labor shortages and population loss affected urban life and the functioning of the state. Politically, the crisis was characterized by the fragmentation of the empire into several competing factions. In addition to the constant civil wars between rival emperors, parts of the empire began to break away. The Gallic Empire, 260–274 CE, was a breakaway state formed in the western provinces, including Gaul, Britain, and Hispania, which declared its independence from Rome during the crisis. Similarly, the Barbarian Empire, centered in the eastern provinces of Syria, Egypt, and Palestine, was founded under Queen Zenobia as an independent power. These secessionist movements weakened the central authority of Rome and led to further fragmentation. Despite the severe challenges, the Roman Empire was not destined to collapse. In the midst of the crisis, a series of capable emperors emerged who were able to restore stability. The most important of these was Aurelian, reigned 270–275 CE, who managed to reunite the empire after the secession of the Gallic and Barbarian empires. Aurelian's military campaigns successfully defeated the breakaway states and restored Roman control over the western and eastern provinces. He also initiated important reforms, including the construction of a defensive wall around Rome to protect it from future attacks, and the introduction of the Aurelianic tax reform, which sought to stabilize the economy. Aurelian's successor, Diocletian, reigned 284–305 CE, would go on to implement the most significant reforms of the period. Diocletian recognized that the Roman Empire had grown too large to be effectively governed by a single ruler. So he divided the empire into two halves, the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. This division was formalized through the Tetrarchy, a system of rule in which power was shared between two senior emperors, known as Augusti, and two junior emperors, known as Caesars. This system helped to stabilize the empire by ensuring that there was always a ruler in each region, and it allowed the empire to respond more effectively to threats on its multiple frontiers. Diocletian also enacted significant economic reforms to stabilize the currency, attempted to control inflation, and restructured the empire's administrative systems to increase efficiency. His reign marked the beginning of the late antiquity period, which saw the empire slowly recover from the crisis. Diocletian's reforms helped to restore order and set the stage for the next phase of Roman imperial history. However, despite these reforms, the crisis of the 3rd century left an indelible mark on the empire. The crisis revealed the vulnerabilities of the Roman political and military system, and highlighted the growing challenges of governing such a vast and diverse empire. Although the empire would continue to thrive for several more centuries, the problems faced during the crisis would contribute to the eventual division of the empire into two distinct halves, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, each with its own set of challenges and histories. Chapter 17. The Late Empire. Diocletian and Constantine. The crisis of the 3rd century had a profound impact on the Roman Empire, but it also set the stage for significant reforms that would reshape the empire in the late 3rd and early 4th centuries. CA. Two emperors, Diocletian and Constantine, played a pivotal role in restoring stability and laying the groundwork for the transformation of the Roman Empire into the Byzantine Empire in the east, and the Western Roman Empire, which would eventually fall. In 476 CE, their reigns were marked by profound political, military, and religious changes that would influence the trajectory of the empire for centuries. Diocletian's reforms and the division of the empire. Diocletian ascended to the throne in 284 CE, after a period of instability following the crisis of the 3rd century. Realizing that the Roman Empire had grown too vast and unwieldy for a single ruler to govern effectively, Diocletian implemented a series of bold reforms that sought to stabilize the empire and restore imperial authority. One of Diocletian's most significant changes was the introduction of the Tetrarchy, a system of government in which power was shared between two senior emperors, Augusti, and two junior emperors, Caesars. This division of the empire into east and west allowed for more efficient governance and defense against external threats. Diocletian ruled the Eastern Empire, while Maximian governed the Western Empire. Each Augustus had a designated successor in the form of a Caesar, creating a system of succession that was intended to ensure stability and prevent the civil wars that had plagued the empire during the crisis. Diocletian also focused on military reforms, strengthening the empire's borders and creating a more organized and professional army. He expanded the empire's defensive fortifications, including the construction of a massive wall around Rome to protect against invasions and internal unrest. Additionally, he reorganized the empire's provincial structure, dividing the empire into smaller, more manageable units known as dioceses. This made administration more efficient and allowed local governors to more effectively oversee their territories. Diocletian's economic policies sought to stabilize the empire's finances, which had been severely affected by inflation and economic instability. He introduced a new system of tax collection based on fixed quotas and attempted to stabilize the currency by issuing new coinage. Diocletian's efforts to control inflation also included the infamous Edict on Maximum Prices, 301 CE, which sought to cap prices on goods and services. Although the edict was largely unsuccessful in curbing inflation, it represented Diocletian's attempt to address the growing economic crises of the empire. One of the most controversial aspects of Diocletian's reign was his persecution of Christians. Diocletian, as a devout follower of the traditional Roman gods, saw Christianity as a threat to the unity of the empire. In 303 CE, he issued the Edicts of Persecution, which led to widespread suppression, including the destruction of Christian churches, the burning of Christian scriptures, and the execution of many Christians. These persecutions, however, would eventually be overturned by his successors, and Christianity would go on to become the dominant religion of the empire. Constantine the Great. The rise of Christianity. Diocletian retired in 305 CE, and after a brief period of conflict, Constantine emerged as the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. In 324 CE, Constantine's reign marked a turning point in Roman history, as he implemented significant reforms that would fundamentally alter the political, military, and religious landscape of the empire. Constantine's most enduring legacy is his conversion to Christianity and his role in making Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire. In 312 CE, Constantine experienced a pivotal moment when, according to legend, he saw a vision of a Christian symbol, the Chi-Rho, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. He believed that the Christian God had granted him victory, and after his success in the battle, Constantine adopted Christianity as his personal faith. This was a major turning point for both Constantine and the empire, as it marked the beginning of Christianity's rise from a persecuted religion to the dominant faith of the empire. In 313 CE, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, which granted religious tolerance to all religions, including Christianity. This edict effectively ended the persecution of Christians and allowed them to openly practice their faith. Constantine also began to favor Christianity in his policies, providing resources for the construction of Christian churches and offering privileges to Christian clergy. His support for Christianity helped pave the way for the eventual establishment of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Theodosius in the late 4th century. CE. Constantine also enacted significant political and military reforms. He restructured the empire's administration, further dividing the empire into dioceses and prefectures, and he created a more centralized and efficient bureaucracy. He also strengthened the military by increasing the size of the army and introducing new military tactics, which helped secure the empire's borders. One of Constantine's most important achievements was the founding of the city of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, in 330 CE. Located strategically on the Bosporus Strait, Constantinople was positioned to control trade routes between Europe and Asia, and it would become the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire for over 1,000 years. Constantine's decision to establish a new capital was part of his broader vision to secure the empire's future and to create a new, Christian-focused center of power. Constantine's reign also saw the beginning of the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, where Constantine played a key role in addressing theological disputes within Christianity, particularly the Arian controversy. The council resulted in the Nicene Creed, which established a unified Christian doctrine and laid the foundation for the structure of the Christian Church in the empire. The transformation of the Roman Empire under Constantine. The Roman Empire underwent profound changes. The political structure of the empire became more centralized, with Constantine assuming direct control over the empire's military, religious, and political affairs. Constantine's support of Christianity marked the beginning of the transition from a polytheistic Roman state to a Christian empire, a change that would have lasting implications for the Roman world. The reign of Diocletian and Constantine marked the end of the crisis of the 3rd century and the beginning of the late Roman Empire. While Diocletian's reforms were focused on stabilizing the empire and maintaining its traditional pagan structures, Constantine's reign marked a definitive shift toward Christianity and a more centralized imperial system. Constantine's policies would shape the future of both the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, the latter of which would survive for nearly 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire. Despite the changes brought about by Constantine, the Western Roman Empire continued to face challenges, including invasions from Germanic tribes and internal instability. The eventual division of the empire into eastern and western halves in 395 CE would set the stage for the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, while the Eastern Roman Empire would continue to thrive for centuries to come. Chapter 18. The fall of the Western Roman Empire. Roman Empire had endured for centuries, but by the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire was in a state of decline, beset by internal turmoil, external invasions, and weakening economic and military power. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, marked by the abdication of the last Roman Emperor Romulus Augustulus, was the culmination of a series of long-term crises and challenges that had been building over several centuries. Internal weaknesses and division of the key factors contributing to the decline of the Western Roman Empire was internal instability. The empire had grown increasingly difficult to govern, particularly as it became divided along political, economic, and military lines. The empire was split into 2 halves in 395 CE after the death of Emperor Theodosius I. His sons, Arcadius and Honorius, took control of the eastern and western halves of the empire respectively. While the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue to thrive for nearly 1,000 years, the Western Roman Empire suffered from weak leadership and a fragmented political structure. The Western Empire was plagued by frequent changes in leadership. Between the 3rd and 5th centuries, the empire saw a succession of short-lived emperors, many of whom were installed or removed by the military. This created an unstable political environment, as military commanders often wielded more power than the emperors themselves. The lack of strong, consistent leadership contributed to the empire's inability to address its many problems. Economic decline. The Western Roman Empire also faced significant economic difficulties. High taxation, inflation, and a reliance on slave labor led to a decline in agricultural productivity and trade. The empire's economy was based largely on the exploitation of conquered territories, and as the empire's borders shrank, so did its resources. The debasement of currency, which began in the 3rd century, worsened the situation, causing widespread inflation. Additionally, the empire's reliance on mercenary forces to supplement its army strained the economy. Many of these mercenaries were Germanic tribesmen or other foreign groups who had little loyalty to Rome. As the empire's resources dwindled, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the large standing army required to defend the empire's vast borders. Military pressures and barbarian invasions. The most immediate cause of the fall of the Western Roman Empire was the pressure from barbarian invasions. The Roman military, once the most powerful in the world, had been weakened by internal divisions, economic strain, and reliance on foreign mercenaries. During the 4th and 5th centuries, various barbarian groups, chiefly the Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, Ostrogoths, and Huns, began to push into Roman territory, taking advantage of the empire's weakened defenses. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, famously sacked Rome in 410 CE, marking the first time the city had been looted in over 800 years. While this was a significant blow to Roman prestige, it was not the end of the Western Empire. However, it signaled the beginning of a series of invasions that would continue to destabilize the empire. The Vandals took North Africa and later sacked Rome again in 455 CE, and the Ostrogoths continued to press from the east. The Huns, under the leadership of Attila, also posed a major threat to the empire, though they were eventually repelled. However, the pressure from these various tribes weakened the Western Roman Empire's ability to respond effectively. By the mid-5th century, the Western Empire had lost much of its former territory, including the provinces of Britain, Gaul, and Hispania, to barbarian kingdoms. The last Roman emperors in the final decades of the Western Roman Empire. The emperors were increasingly ineffective. The last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was a puppet ruler installed by his father, Orestes, who was a military leader. Romulus Augustulus had little real power and was largely a symbolic figure. In 476 Common Era, Romulus was deposed by Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain who had been serving as a mercenary in the Roman army. Odoacer's overthrow of Romulus Augustulus marked the formal end of the Western Roman Empire. Unlike previous usurpers, Odoacer did not claim the title of emperor. Instead, he declared himself king of Italy and sent the imperial regalia to the Eastern Roman Emperor, Zeno, acknowledging his sovereignty. While the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, would continue to exist for another 1,000 years, the Western Roman Empire was no more. The legacy of the Western Roman Empire at the fall of the Western Roman Empire was not a sudden event, but the culmination of decades of decline. The political, economic, and military weaknesses of the empire, coupled with external invasions, led to its disintegration. However, the legacy of Rome did not die with the empire. The Roman legal system, its language Latin, and its cultural and architectural achievements continued to influence Europe long after the empire's fall. The rise of the Holy Roman Empire in the 9th century, as well as the continued dominance of Roman law and culture throughout medieval Europe, ensured that the legacy of the Western Roman Empire lived on. In the East, the Byzantine Empire preserved Roman governance and culture for centuries, and its influence would shape the development of Eastern Europe and the Orthodox Christian world. Ultimately, the fall of the Western Roman Empire was a transformative moment in history, marking the end of ancient Rome's dominance and the beginning of the Middle Ages. While the empire itself was no longer a political entity, its impact on the world continued to resonate through the ages, shaping the future of Europe, the Mediterranean, and beyond.